Good afternoon, and thank you guys for joining us today. Um, I am technically out of office today, so I have pre-recorded this session. So as you guys listen to the content that I'm providing, I will have somebody from my team on the webinar to answer questions. So as usual, feel free to type in any questions in the Q&A session, and the representative from my team will address them at the conclusion of the webinar. Today's session, we're going to talk about maintenance. You guys know me from all of our previous sessions. Agenda today, similar to what we do every month, except I do have some additional updates on CMMC, so I will cover those prior to getting into the maintenance topics. No changes to this slide. The updates that are actually going to kind of validate what we've been saying month after month here, so I have not made any changes here. No updates here. Delta training is still the latest training that was provided to us as registered practitioners. And I'll stop here just before we get into the maintenance topic itself. So about a week ago, a partner of Ntiva is called Prevail that offers a SaaS offering where you can store CUI data into a SaaS environment that is certified to keep it out of your corporate environment and make the audit process simpler. Went ahead and hosted a webinar with the Deputy CIO from the DoD, as well as the head of CMMC AB. And on that session, they covered a lot of the questions that had come up through forums and emails and things that they've seen through their preliminary processes, as well as gave updates to things that they were doing as far as documentation timelines. No big changes, though. A lot of it was, like I said, the validation of what we've been hearing all along. They did speak to POAMs. They stated that the items that had a value of 1 point would be eligible to receive a POAM. Those with values of 3 and 5 would not, with the exception of the FIPS item that has a 5-point value. But to be eligible for a POAM, you had to achieve at least 3 out of the 5 points. I did go and put a question in the Q&A and ask for the specifics of the POAM guidance in writing, and did not receive that. If I do receive it, I will pass it along. They also didn't state how long the POAMs would have from a remediation or correction timeline, and they didn't state how many you can have. So there was a little bit of criteria around what would be eligible, but again, you can't assume that, well, if I just missed 20 1-point items, that they're going to allow 20 POAMs. They were very clear to say that even if they do allow something as a POAM, you will have a timeline that you have to achieve it. And then if you don't achieve it in that timeline, they will take actions such as not paying you the fees that are associated to the contract. You may lose the contract, etc. I have seen some stuff online from different vendors stating how many times you'll be given a chance to correct a POAM, what the reassessment looks like, the periods of hey, you'll get X number of days and then you have to do X, Y, and Z. None of that was provided by the two authorities. So I can't validate that what you might read on the internet is accurate. All I can tell you is the Deputy CIO and the head of CMMC AB did not provide that guidance. So if you do see that, they might be correct, but I would not take that as word or gospel until you hear it from the authorities. They did address things like customers and clients, contractors, however you want to label it, stating that, hey, I'm really small. I don't think this contract's going to be needed, to have these types of requirements. I think it's going to be hard for DoD to find people who can meet them. So they did say that a program manager on the DoD side can do a market survey and submit a waiver if they feel like the market can't meet the requirements. However, they said that they think that will be such a rare exception, we should not plan on that, and just almost forget like that's even an option. They also addressed the fact that a lot of folks, based on previous updates, were thinking they would be allowed to self-assess at level 2. They felt that this was also inaccurate, that it would be a very small number of contractors that would be allowed to self-assess. Their logic being they're going to be putting the certification requirement in so many of their contracts that if you support one or more, you're likely to have it in at least one of those contracts. So again, they really stressed plan on being certified. They did talk about the team that they have working on creating rule text and documentation. They're planning to turn that over to OMB between mid-July and mid-August of this year. And then the intent was for OMB to review until approximately March of next year. They're hoping they'll give them an interim rule, which will allow them to start putting things into RFPs. But even if the documentation is ready in March, that will open a 60-day public comment period, which could lead to the CMMC requirements being added as early as May. They did state that if they didn't meet that March deadline, or if the interim rule was not given, then it would push it out a year till 2024. This one seems to also be a little bit of a area of concern, given that the initial information that was published stated that contracts wouldn't see CMMC language until 2025 or 2026. And here they are saying it could be as early as May of 2023. A lot has to happen, though, obviously, between now and then. So I can't advise whether or not I think that's a good timeline. I have seen, again, other companies go out and post things stating it could be as early as December of this year. Not saying that couldn't happen, but that is not what the officials stated in the recorded webinar. They also went and stated that the DIBCAC performed 300 assessments against organizations who self-assessed and gave themselves a score of 110. And they were seeing such differing opinions of what the contractor felt was, acceptable to achieve a 110 and what DoD felt. So now they're going back and performing medium assessments to interview a lot of those folks to ask them, how did you get to where you were? Why do you think you're compliant? They obviously want to see, is there a lack of communication, documentation, knowledge, etc., or was it simply people are just wanting to say that they've achieved it and basically defrauding them? They did mention that the False Claims Act would be used to punish those that purposely try to deceive the DoD. So it's my belief that the fact they brought this up, they must be seeing things in those self-assessments that lend them to believe it's more than just not understanding. They did also reiterate that the DFARS clause 252.204-7012 has been around since December of 2016. Many current contracts already include this clause. So if you have that clause in one of your contracts, technically you're already supposed to be compliant. One of the questions that came up was, since this takes time and money to become compliant, should a contractor really be focused on it now or wait until final rulings are published so that you're not potentially doing something and then having to change directions? They obviously stated that you should really be working on it now. And again, if you had that DFARS clause, you're already in default, essentially, if you haven't achieved these things. And finally, they talked about reciprocity and international partners. They said that they are looking at international partners and rules and agreements there that they're drafting. They realize international partners will be used in a lot of cases. They did say they will need to be compliant, and they're figuring out the rules on how to make them compliant, because obviously not only do they have to meet the requirements, but they have to have certifying bodies in those countries to go out and do the C3PAO audits. Reciprocity, the DoD Deputy CIO definitely felt that if you were using FedRAMP services, that reciprocity is a great thing. Why reinvent the wheel when someone's already gone and audited them? But when it came to other certifications like ISO 27001, it appeared they hadn't really given this a lot of thought. They definitely like the idea that if you've already received a certification like that, reciprocity could exist, but that was something they were going to have to look into. And they didn't state that by getting ISO, for example, would that automatically make you CMMC compliant? Potentially, it could just mean that the controls that were audited for ISO would not need to be audited, and then any controls that were not in ISO might still need that third-party audit, which again would reduce the amount of work and the cost and the timeline, but would not just be a one-for-one, I have ISO, therefore I'm done. Again, that's something they said they would look into, so I would not expect any type of ruling or information to come too quickly. And for anybody who is interested in seeing that webinar, you can go out to Prevail's website. It's spelled Preveil. You can sign up. There's a link out there. When you sign up, it makes it look like you're registering for the event, but the event's already occurred. As soon as you click the box and put in your information and register, it will redirect you to the page where it's the actual recording. So it's about I don't know, an hour long, maybe just less than an hour. If you'd like to go hear everything that I talked about in great detail, please go watch that. All right, and for maintenance, this month, we only have one specific resource. That's the NIST Special Publication 888. So that makes it a little bit easier. You only have one resource you have to look at. And there are only 6 practices or controls here, all focused on the maintenance of the systems, the tools and techniques, and the personnel. You notice that there's one in here for offsite maintenance, sanitize of any CUI. So you're starting to see CUI pop into things. Diagnostics and test programs, and multi-factor authentication, and then the supervision of the activities. So fairly easy ones that we're going to go through today, but ones that I think are often overlooked. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We just don't think about them too frequently. But when we look at attacks like the Target attack and how Target was essentially hacked through an HVAC company, these types of scenarios I think come into play and are very relevant. So perform maintenance on organizational systems. Wanted to point out here, this includes hardware, firmware, applications, extends to things like scanners, copiers, printers. A lot of the stuff here are things that people don't think about. I want to put in there, HVAC, like I just stated with the Target attack, fire sprinklers, elevators, escalators. People overlook CCTV systems. I know as time goes on, those systems maybe become what we would call legacy or antiquated systems, and they're replaced by new systems. But the fact that people aren't paying attention to them or maybe don't even know they're there means they're overlooked. Badging systems, physical barricades, etc. So all of these things obviously require maintenance. The question is, do organizations work that into their maintenance schedules, or do you only seem to learn or think about these when something breaks and you have to call someone in to repair, say, an elevator? We do a lot of things like updating and patching operating systems, but what about the BIOS? What about firmware for different devices? All of that needs to be considered and put into your maintenance plan if you haven't done so already. And then do think about those devices that are normally peripherals or just afterthoughts, like scanners, copiers, printers. While they may not be the most likely device to be attacked, again, what's the point of patching all of your other systems and updating all of your systems and then leaving these attached to your network and not doing it? To me, that's the same thing as like locking all of your windows and leaving the front door open. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Provide the controls on the tools, techniques, mechanism, and personnel used to conduct the maintenance. This includes the tools that would not be considered within the system boundaries that process, store, and transmit CUI, but are used specifically for diagnostic and repair. So these are things that are going to be brought in by repair personnel. They may be connected to your network. They may be laptops that have software on them. You have to consider the fact that someone can come in, connect to your network to fix something, but then potentially have access to CUI or systems that contain CUI. You have to have some way of covering how you approve, control, and monitor these tools. As an example, when I went on site for DoD, before you could connect to the medical treatment facility, you had to go into a special room. Your device was connected to essentially what it was, a segmented guest network. It was scanned for viruses, for malware, and then it was also scanned to see what you had on the computer. So if you had any software that they thought was questionable, they would ask you, what is this? What's it being used for? And potentially you had to remove it before you were allowed to connect the device. So something along those lines is what they're looking for. You may have things like software, diagnostic equipment, packet sniffers. All of these need to be patched, up to date, and again, have a good justification for why someone's using it. The last thing you want to do is send someone into, say, your server room, allow them to connect to your network, and you have no idea what they have on their computer and why they're using it. Most of the time, they're going to be sitting there working. You're not going to be looking over their shoulder, so you have no idea what they're doing anyway. And as I stated, conducting vulnerability scans of devices before allowing them onto the network is just a good practice that everybody should be doing anyway. Don't assume that because someone comes to work on your system, even if they're with a security company, that they've done the due diligence to make sure their systems are secure. And then you may want to consider something like a visual inspection of cases, boxes, bags brought into your environment. Some folks may not consider the being brought in as important, but what's being taken out. Someone comes in with a large kind of suitcase or duffel bag, what prevents them from taking something from your environment and stealing it on their way out? And then ensure equipment removed for offsite maintenance is sanitized of any CUI. Consider, and some of this is coming from the documentation, but consider the differences CUI brings compared to just other unclassed materials. So because of the sensitivity nature, even though it is all unclassified, just in the same way that we would mark physical papers and things of that nature to say unclassed or sensitive or confidential, electronic data needs to be the same way. Make sure people aren't taking written documentation off. Make sure that electronic data isn't leaving and going onto their peripherals or their devices. Refer to 888 which is the media sanitation guide on how to do this. I gave what is not a comprehensive list, but some of the things that you should be doing, like the types of media that you'll use, how you'll store and transport them, what the different sanitation methods are. There's going to be benefits, costs, ease of use, availability, applicability, et cetera, for each thing that you're doing. So what I see a lot of people do is go out in most cases and say, well, what solution do I want to use? I'm going to go look for a vendor who does media sanitation. What should I choose? And they're really looking for a solution without even defining what the problem is, what type of media they're going to use. So do your due diligence, figure out what it is that you're going to use, how you're going to store and transport it, and then select the best method for sanitizing it. You can use things like cryptographic erase or crypto shredding with encryption keys. So for example, if you have something in the cloud and it's encrypted, you can re-encrypt it so that you have, and basically get rid of the keys so that you have no way to unencrypt it. This way, even if your cloud vendor has not deleted the data for some reason or it's stored in a backup somewhere, you're not worried that anyone can access the data because it's been encrypted twice and no one has the keys. And then consider what is within the scope and boundary. Some things, if they don't fall within the boundary, you may still want to have a method for taking care of the work that's expected, but you're not going to be audited on it. One of the things that comes up the most is, will this be within my boundary? Will I be audited on it? Where's the line between it? That's something you guys need to work on. Again, what kind of CUI do you have? Where are you storing it? How are you maintaining it? If you can't answer those questions first, scope and boundary are going to be extremely difficult. And then this one I added on here really had nothing to do with what was listed in the guides, but I think it's important, which is figure out roles and responsibilities. The special pubs do talk about roles and responsibilities, but instead of just defining a person or a title who has a responsibility, think about a RACI chart format where you're listing the different types of media, the different types of actions, and then you check who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. The accountable I put an asterisk next to because when you use the RACI chart format, for each line item, only one person or group can be held accountable. You can have a lot of people who are responsible for some action that's going to take place, but ultimately the blame lies with one person or one group, and that's the accountable. So it might not be a bad idea if you have a lot of CUI or you have a lot of media that needs to be sanitized to consider building out a RACI chart, listing them all there so that you've brainstormed the thought of them all, and then you determine who has each role. That will make it a lot easier for you when something comes up and you say, who am I supposed to inform? Who do I need to consult when I need to make a decision? It'll all be spelled out in the chart, and no matter who looks at it, they'll know what to do. I think that's one of the things that people also fail to remember or consider is you personally might know exactly who to go to for everything that you have to do, but you might be out and someone else might need to perform the work and they don't have the knowledge you have. So if it's not documented, what are your expectations for them? Check the media containing diagnostic and test programs for malicious code. Very simple. Doing vulnerability scans, potentially a pen test, just depends on what's being brought in there. But just make sure that before you connect something to your organization's infrastructure, that it's clean. If the issues are found, treat them as security incidents and just invoke your incident handling procedures and policies. So again, this assumes that you have an IR plan, but you should, as we've discussed through other webinars. If you have one, treat it as that. It's not that someone intentionally did something malicious, but you should follow the same procedures that you would. Clean the device if you have to, or send the person away, make them get a new device, whatever the case may be. Just don't allow them to connect to your infrastructure. Require multi-factor to establish non-local maintenance sessions. So this one we've already covered in 3.5.3. So I didn't want to repeat it here. You can always go back and look at that. But the point here is you already have ways of establishing non-local or remote connections. This should be no different from a maintenance perspective. So just ensure that you're following the same practices. You may want to go, a couple steps further, creating guest accounts, guest networks, limiting when the accounts are available. Maybe you create the account, it's good for a week or two, and then you shut it off, disable it, delete it, etc. But nonetheless, you're following the same MFA processes and procedures as you would for any remote connection. And then one of the most important ones here, supervise the maintenance activities of the maintenance personnel. I know in a lot of cases, something comes up, you're in an office, you've got meetings all day, all of a sudden someone says, hey, a vendor or an integrator is going to be on site, I need someone to escort this person. And initially you escort them, you get them badged, you show them where they can set up, maybe where the restroom is, where the break room is. But then you say, well, I've got to go, into this meeting, I'll check back with you in an hour, or ping me if you need me. These folks are not part of your group, your organization. They really shouldn't be left alone. So you really should have someone assigned to them. It doesn't need to be you, but someone. So think ahead of, if you're going to have people coming in, where would you want them to set up? Who could watch them? Even if it's, an executive assistant or office manager, if they're sitting in a glass, a room with a glass wall or whatever, someone just has eyes on them so they're not walking around your building. Or if you have CCTV coverage, someone who's watching to make sure they're only going into approved areas. You're going to see things like when you deal with HVAC, electrical, mechanical vendors, they're going to be in and out a lot. They're going to go back and forth to their work fans or to the roof or to the outside devices that are attached to the inside mechanical devices. Clearly, you're not going to walk with them every time they go to their vehicle, but do you have a way to monitor them through CCTV coverage to make sure they're only going to the right places, make sure they're not taking anything out? And duration of the visit often plays a role here. I put that. So if they're going to be there for days, then maybe you're considering a different protocol so that they can walk around unescorted, but maybe you go through a little bit higher check of the personnel and their background before you bring them in. If they're going to be there for an hour because it's hey, the AC just broke and they're coming out today, maybe someone sits with them or is just right outside the room where the mechanical devices reside. So again, just think of those things in advance, have a plan. The biggest point of all these is it's less important about what you decide to do than it is that you decided to do something and you've documented it and you understand it prior to it occurring. Trying to come up with this plan, what you're going to do while they're on site is really not the time to do this. You've got the time now, obviously, why not take steps? And as you do take steps to create these policies and plans, if you notice that, as an example, in this slide, I'm going to have someone come on site to do HVAC work. I have no CCTV coverage. They're going to need access to the whole building. They're going to be in and out. Maybe I need to consider putting in some type of CCTV. Maybe I need a badge on doors that, yes, you can give them a swipe badge so they can do the work they need, but it's logged in each place that they're going and when they're doing it. Those things, just having that plan and enacting it through like a tabletop test might show other gaps in your security protocol. And on that note, I'm going to leave about 4 minutes left in this session. So again, if you guys have had any questions, I hope you've typed them in the chat, and then my associate there will address those questions. And then I will see you guys next month. Thank you.